I always hated moving. The packing, the lifting, the unpacking. The disorienting strangeness of sleeping in a new place. Of trying to convince yourself that these walls, this space, will feel like home soon enough. But this time was different. This time, I was looking forward to it. A fresh start. A place where no one knew me. Where I could be alone with my thoughts. Away from the suffocating familiarity of my old life. The apartment was perfect. Too perfect. The building itself was old but well-maintained. A relic from the 1970s with sturdy brick walls and a symmetrical row of balconies that gave it a sterile uniformity. The hallways smelled faintly of fresh paint, as if someone had gone over the scuffs and scratches just before I arrived. The carpet, a muted shade of beige, was clean but slightly faded, betraying years of quiet footsteps. The air held the scent of dust and something else, something stale, like a place that had been sealed off for too long. It was the emptiness that struck me first. No neighbors peeking through their doorways. No muffled television sounds bleeding through the walls. No distant clatter of dishes. No casual laughter echoing down the halls. As I dragged my suitcase through the corridor, I noticed the mailboxes in the lobby. Every single one was empty. Not just empty, but pristine. No flyers, no forgotten letters, no signs that they had ever been used at all. Maybe the building was new? Maybe I was the first tenant in a complex still waiting to be filled? And yet, the manager hadn't mentioned anything about that. He had simply handed me the key with an odd, unreadable expression and muttered, "You'll like it here. It's quiet. Too quiet." The door to my apartment, 3B, groaned slightly as I pushed it open. The place was modest. A small kitchen, a narrow hallway leading to the bedroom, a living room with a sliding glass door that led to a tiny balcony overlooking the street below. The furniture was sparse but functional. A simple couch, a wooden coffee table, a bed with a plain white comforter. I set my bags down and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was fine. A little eerie, but fine. I was just psyching myself out. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor, I went through the motions of settling in. Unpacked my clothes, set my toothbrush in the bathroom, made a mental note to buy groceries in the morning. Eventually, exhaustion won out over curiosity, and I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the stillness. That was when I heard it, a faint scratching sound. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I held my breath, straining my ears. It was coming from the wall to my right, a slow, deliberate scratching, like nails dragging lightly against the plaster. Rats? I hope not. Maybe it was just the pipes settling. Old buildings made weird noises, didn't they? I turned over, pulling the blanket tighter around myself. The noise stopped. Still, unease settled deep in my chest, an irrational feeling that I wasn't alone. That someone or something was just on the other side of that wall, listening, watching. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Get some sleep. Tomorrow would be better. It was just a sound. Just an empty apartment. Just my imagination, right? I woke up feeling drained, as if I hadn't truly slept at all. The day passed in a haze. Groceries, unpacking, mindless scrolling through my phone in an attempt to distract myself from the gnawing unease. The apartment still felt too empty. There was something unnatural about the silence, an absence of life that made the space feel like a stage set rather than a home. I tried to convince myself that I was being silly. Cities were loud, sure, but wasn't this what I had wanted? Peace. Solitude. A break from everything. Still, I kept checking the peephole when I passed the door, hoping or fearing that I would see something, someone. But the hallway remained empty, the doors around me untouched, their peepholes staring blankly back at me. By the time night fell, I was relieved to climb into bed, thinking that maybe with a full day behind me, I could actually get some real sleep. I had just started drifting when the footsteps began. A slow, heavy thump from the ceiling above. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. Another footstep, then another. The deliberate pacing of someone walking across the floor. I swallowed hard. The apartment above me was supposed to be vacant. I stayed still, listening, my body rigid beneath the blankets. The footsteps moved from one side of the ceiling to the other, slow and deliberate, pausing every few steps as if whoever was stopping to listen. The air felt different, charged, as if the weight of the silence had finally shifted, replaced by something unseen. For the first time since moving in, I felt the distinct sensation that I wasn't alone. I wasn't thinking when I threw back the covers and grabbed the broom from the corner of my bedroom. My body moved on instinct, a deep-rooted need to do something, to disrupt the awful rhythm of those footsteps. I marched into the living room and, without hesitating, jabbed the broom handle against the ceiling. "Hey!" My voice was hoarse, uncertain. "Cut it out!" Silence. I waited, breath held, listening to my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then 3 slow footsteps. Directly above me. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I slammed the broom against the ceiling, harder this time. "I know you're up there." Nothing. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched on, pressing down on me until my breathing felt too loud, my presence in the apartment too obvious. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to relax. Maybe it was my nerves. Maybe there was a rational explanation. I would call the landlord in the morning. The next day, I tracked him down in his tiny office near the lobby. He was an older man, mid-50s, with deep lines etched into his face. When I explained the noises from the apartment above, he listened, his expression unreadable. Finally, he leaned forward, fingers tapping against his desk. "That's not possible," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "There's no one in 4B. Hasn't been for a long time." I shivered. Then why am I hearing footsteps? He glanced toward the door, as if checking that no one else was listening. Old buildings make noise. Could be the pipes, the foundation shifting. "Pipes don't sound like footsteps," I interrupted. His lips pressed into a thin line. For a second, I thought he was about to say something important, something real, but instead, he just gave a tight shake of his head. "Let me know if it happens again." That was it. Dismissed. I left his office feeling worse than before, a pit forming in my stomach. The way he avoided my gaze, the clipped way he spoke, he was hiding something. But what? That night, I dreamed of shadows. I was in my bed, but I wasn't alone. The air was thick, pressing down on me like a weight. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Shapes loomed in the darkness, tall and featureless, their outlines flickering like something struggling to stay seen. They stood around my bed, unmoving, watching. One leaned closer. I wanted to scream, to kick and thrash, but my body refused to obey. The shadow loomed over me, and though it had no eyes, I felt it staring, pressing into me with a presence so suffocating I thought my lungs might collapse. Then, in the silence of my dream, it spoke. "You shouldn't be here." I woke up gasping, my sheets damp with sweat. The apartment was silent, but I wasn't fooled. Somewhere, just beyond the edge of hearing, something was waiting, watching. The apartment was suffocating. It wasn't the air. No, the air was still and stale, just as it had been since I moved in. It wasn't the temperature either, though my skin prickled with an icy sweat every time the sun went down. It was something else, something unseen, lurking in the spaces between shadows. I wasn't alone here. I had spent the entire day trying to ignore the feeling. I forced myself to go about normal tasks, cooking, cleaning, scrolling through my phone, but I was restless. Every time I looked away, I felt the weight of something standing just behind me, watching, waiting for me to notice. When night fell, I turned on every single light in the apartment. I had promised myself I wouldn't do that. I had promised that I wouldn't let paranoia win. But the idea of sitting in the dark, of allowing shadows to stretch and pool in the corners of my apartment, was unbearable. Still, exhaustion won eventually. I crawled into bed, my body heavy with fatigue. The lamp on my nightstand cast a dull glow against the walls, not bright enough to fully push back the darkness, but just enough to keep it from swallowing me whole. I lay there still and listening, and then the creaking started. It was faint at first, a soft, slow groan from the hinges of a door. I turned my head toward the bedroom door, closed, just as I had left it. Then came another creak. This time, it was the closet door. I sat up, pulse hammering against my ribs. My breath was too loud in the silence. The closet door was open now, just slightly, no more than an inch. I stared at it, unblinking, my mind racing for a logical explanation. Had I left it open? No, I was sure I hadn't. I had never left it open at night. Then, as if it had been waiting for my realization to settle, the door creaked again, opening another inch. I scrambled for the bedside lamp, flipping it off and on, as if testing to make sure light could still exist in this space. The bulb flickered slightly, but held steady. The closet door didn't move again. But I didn't sleep. By the time 3 a.m. rolled around, I was still awake, still gripping my blanket with white-knuckled hands. And that was when I felt it. A cold touch on my ankle, not the brush of fabric, not a draft from the window. No, fingers. I jerked upright, gasping, and flipped on the bedside lamp with a trembling hand. My leg was ice cold where it had been touched. There was nothing there. The room was exactly as it had been before, but the air felt heavier. Charged, as if something had only just vanished, retreating into the unseen places where it could wait, unbothered, until I made the mistake of turning the light off again. I pressed a hand over my racing heart, trying to steady my breathing. I told myself I had imagined it, that I was overreacting, but I knew better. Something had touched me, and it was still here. The next morning, I found myself avoiding my own reflection. There was something wrong with my face, not physically, but in a way I couldn't quite explain. My skin looked pale, almost translucent. My eyes, dark-ringed and sunken. I barely recognized myself. Worse than that was the dizziness. It had started sometime after dawn, a wave of nausea that rolled through me in slow, relentless pulses. Every time I moved, the walls seemed to tilt slightly, like I was standing on unstable ground. By the afternoon, my limbs felt sluggish, as if something unseen was weighing me down. Like I was being drained. I didn't want to stay in the apartment, but I also didn't want to leave. The thought of stepping outside, of walking through the hallway, past those empty doors and dark peepholes, sent a cold shiver through my spine. And so I stayed. I forced down food I could barely taste. I kept the television on, but didn't pay attention to the flickering images. I stayed close to the light, but the shadows kept moving. Even with every bulb burning, the corners of the apartment seemed darker than before. The space beneath the couch, the edges of the ceiling, the sliver of shadow under the closet door. All of it felt deeper, like the darkness was thickening, as if something was pushing its way through. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat upright in bed, lamp on, waiting. The nausea had worsened. My stomach churned, and my head felt clouded, my thoughts slipping like sand through my fingers. I kept my eyes fixed on the closet door. I would not let it move this time. The hours stretched on. 2 Uhr nachts. 2:30 Uhr nachts. My eyelids grew heavy. My body ached with exhaustion, but I refused to close my eyes. Then, a whisper. It was so soft that at first I thought I had imagined it. Then I heard it again. Not words, not a voice, just the faintest exhale like someone breathing right beside me. My body locked up. I could feel it now. That same weight in the air, the same suffocating presence pressing against me. It was in the room. I turned my head slowly, terrified that if I moved too fast, I would see something I couldn't handle. There was nothing there, but I could feel it. Right beside my bed, watching, waiting. I forced myself to move. My hand shook as I reached for the bedside lamp, gripping the switch like a lifeline. But the second I flipped it, the light went out. Darkness swallowed the room. I choked on a scream. My hand scrambled for the switch, clicking it on and off, but nothing happened. I wasn't alone. I knew that with every fiber of my being. The whispering returned, closer now. And then, the mattress shifted, like someone had just sat down beside me. I lunged for my phone, fingers fumbling against the screen, trying to summon light, any light. My vision spun. My limbs were sluggish. Move, move, move. The flashlight flicked on, the beam cutting through the dark. Nothing. The bed was empty. The room was empty. But the nausea didn't fade. The pressure in the air didn't lift. Because I knew, even though I couldn't see it, even though it was silent now, it was still here, and it was getting closer, I wasn't sure how many days had passed since I had last slept. The hours bled together, slipping through my fingers like sand. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I felt the weight of something watching me. The apartment had become a trap, its silence thick with unspoken threats. I left every light on, but it didn't help. The shadows had grown bolder. I could see them shifting at the edges of my vision, moving when I wasn't looking directly at them. The corners of the rooms felt deeper now, stretching into a darkness that no amount of light could reach. And the whispering hadn't stopped. It was always faint like breath against my ear. Not words, not even a language, just the sound of something exhaling, waiting. By the fourth night, my body was shutting down. I hadn't eaten, had barely moved. My limbs were leaden, my thoughts tangled and sluggish. Sleep clawed at the edges of my mind, and I knew, sooner or later, I wouldn't be able to fight it. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up, a crushing weight on my chest. I gasped, but the air barely moved through my throat. It was like something invisible had pressed down on me, pinning me to the bed. I tried to move. I couldn't. Panic surged through my veins. My body was paralyzed, my limbs frozen in place. My lungs burned as I fought to take in a proper breath. And then, a sound, deep, guttural, a low moan, vibrating through the air like a sound too large for the room. It was coming from right above me. Terror seized me, but I couldn't scream. I couldn't even turn my head. The noise surrounded me, wrapping itself around my body like an unseen force, pressing into my skin, into my bones. The moan was long and drawn out, almost pained. But beneath that, beneath the suffering, was something else, something hungry. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision. I strained my eyes toward it, barely able to shift my gaze. The room was dark, but not fully. One of the lamps in the living room was still on, casting a dim glow through the open bedroom door. And in that faint light, I saw it. A shape, indistinct and writhing, hovering just beyond the doorway. It twitched, not like something moving, but like something learning how to move. Its form shifted, jerking forward an inch, then stopping. Then another inch, and another. It was coming closer. A tremor ran through my body, but I still couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. My lungs felt like they were collapsing, the pressure on my chest unbearable. The moaning grew louder. The air around me was thick and damp, like something breathing right into my face. And then, it whispered. Not a word, not a sentence, just a sound. A long, drawn-out exhale that sent icy fingers crawling down my spine. And then, finally, I found my voice. A strangled, choked sound forced its way out of my throat. It wasn't a scream, not really, but it was enough. The thing lurched back. The pressure on my chest lifted. Air rushed into my lungs, my body jerking upright as I sucked in breath after breath. The room was empty. The doorway was empty. The shadows were still. The whispering had stopped. But I knew, even though it had retreated, even though I could finally breathe again, it wasn't gone. It was still here, watching, waiting. And next time, I might not wake up. I stopped trying to sleep. What was the point? Sleep wasn't rest anymore. It was surrender. It was letting it get closer. The moaning had stopped, but the breathing hadn't. It was always there, thick and wet, slipping between the walls, curling around me when I sat motionless in bed. Sometimes it was at my back. Sometimes it was at my door. Sometimes, God help me, it was right next to my ear. I never turned the lights off. It didn't matter. The shadows moved anyway. They flickered in the corners of my vision, deepening in places they shouldn't. I stopped looking into mirrors. I was afraid I'd see something standing behind me. I was afraid I'd see myself, but not me. Time blurred. I wasn't sure how many nights had passed, how many days I spent curled up in the corner of my bed, forcing my breath to stay slow and steady, pretending I couldn't hear the whispering pressing against my skin. But on the last night, the night that finally broke me, there were no whispers, only the pain. It started as a sharp sting, a sudden jolt at the edge of my consciousness, like a needle piercing my skin. Then came the tearing, a burning, searing agony that ripped through my leg, all the way to the bone. I screamed, The sound shattered the heavy silence, but nothing answered me. I fumbled in the dark, gasping through the pain, fingers scrambling for my phone. My hands were slick with sweat, my limbs sluggish from exhaustion. I turned on the flashlight. The light cut through the shadows, and I saw it. My sheets were soaked in blood. A deep wound gaped just above my ankle, the flesh ragged, torn away in uneven chunks. A bite mark. Something had bitten me. A sob choked its way out of my throat. My skin was crawling, my head spinning with nausea, with shock, with the realization that I hadn't felt it until now. I had been awake, and yet something had crawled into my bed. Something had sunk its teeth into me, and I hadn't even noticed. That was it. I couldn't do this anymore. I didn't care if I had nowhere to go. I didn't care if I had to run barefoot and bleeding into the street like a madwoman. I was leaving. Now. I grabbed my keys with trembling hands, shoving my feet into the nearest shoes. I stumbled toward the door, barely able to walk with the pain shooting up my leg. The apartment was watching me. I could feel it. It was waiting. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I yanked the door open and ran. I didn't breathe again until I was inside my car. Doors locked, engine roaring to life. The apartment building loomed behind me, its windows dark, empty. No movement, no sign of life, like it had never been lived in. I peeled out of the parking lot, speeding down the empty street. My pulse was hammering in my ears. My leg was throbbing. I needed to go to a hospital. I needed to get far, far away. I risked a glance down at the wound, and then my stomach dropped. The bleeding had stopped. The pain was fading. I pressed my fingers against the raw, torn flesh. It should have been unbearable. It should have made me cry out, but I felt nothing, just a deep, numbing cold spreading up my leg. My hands trembled as I flipped down the sun visor, staring into the small vanity mirror. And that was when I saw it, my reflection, my face, my mouth, smeared with blood. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.